Hi everyone. I'm super excited to host Theodore Galanos, generative AI leader at Aurecon. Welcome back on the show, Theodore.
Hi, nice being here. It's been a while. It's nice to see you again. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for
I'm
having
always
me.
like fol following your updates on LinkedIn and other the ideas you're tinkering with, your thoughts on AI, and it's so much insightful. I'm curious to know, like in 2025, what was like some key highlights of AI applications at Aurecon?
Key highlights, right? I think like what we saw in 2025 was a lot more maturity in the sort of solutions that we build. On the one side, it's like essentially the platforms that we focused on through which we can solve real problems slowly for both for internally and for our clients. So there were a few platforms. Some of them were like publicly discussed as well. So that was a big one. Another one was again something we publicly discussed was a sort of like one of the first. I don't know if the term is correct. AI native sort of projects that we did, focusing on a AI solution around the problem. And the other exciting thing is like how much more engagement with AI has happened internally with people like tinkering on their own with us in the platforms we build, in the tools. I think that was a big highlight. And we have this sort of internal community where we showcase things that others do, not just what we do, actually the opposite. And it has a lot of attention and great presentations, which shows me like there's not just interest anymore, but there is like more and more applied sort of focus from people. So I think those were some of the biggest highlights. There's more that I forget now because I haven't prepared. For those that don't believe it, this is not prepared at all. There's more probably that I forget now, but I think that was the highlights. The other thing I guess that happened to be a bit more somber is that we did try and experiment it and explore a lot of things in 2025. We learned a lot. So like there's parts of our workflows and pipelines that we have that I think now are really good. They're not like revolutionary in the sense no one could ever have thought of that, but they are things you can only get by working through failures, essentially, right? And the one thing that I personally is a big highlight for me is that, and everyone knows I'm a very big supporter of AI. Personally, I'm probably the most of the people I know in the industry to the annoying degree, but I realized that was a big highlight that there is this sort of like interesting gap between what the models can do externally, which is another highlight, right? What we saw with Opus 4.5 and coding and all the stuff that is going on lately with what they can do in our domain without proper setup, harness, and all the stuff. And that gap was very interesting to me because, like as I said, I'm an optimist, so I can see how we can close that gap, but it's not yet closed. And I think that's a very interesting space to be for everyone, not just for us. But yeah, it's something that I think positions us really well because we do have an understanding of how we can close that gap. And I think by closing that gap is should be at the top of everyone's list. So like if you want AI, applied AI or AI solutions or platforms or products or workflows or agents, it doesn't matter. In our domain, everything we should be focusing on is how can we close that gap, right? And kind of like that's my mission for 2026. So that was also a highlight, interesting highlight, but yeah, those were
I see. So many things. And I'm curious to know when you joined Aurecon until now, like coming from the expertise of AI and creating like culture of in the firm where people are open to sharing ideas, testing
yeah.
model, like what were some learnings? How can one create such culture in a traditional or like firm where they might not be used to this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, think I don't know if I have the answer to this, right? Like, if there is one answer, but I can say what I did. And to be honest, thinking back, it wasn't it wasn't all a planned sort of approach, and perhaps that's why it worked. The first thing that I did is like I believed the same way I still believe now. So like in a way I never changed it. I never changed in my beliefs or approach or optimism about this technology from day one, right? And you're right to say like from day one at that time, let's say around 2022 to now, obviously the environment around us is very different. But from that day, I could see what I see today. So that was like, I think, the most powerful thing that I could do, or maybe I don't know, I could do more, but I think one of the things that I did to slowly create something around me, at least, I'm not saying I created the whole culture of AI in Oregon, right? Was like sort of embody that belief, right? Also, in what I would say, like from day one, I would say the same thing I say to people now. Just the language has changed a bit, right? But also in what I would do, like all the things I experimented, all the things my team eventually, as it was assembled, we explored, experimented, worked, collaborated. They were all around this amazing technology and what it can do. So that was a very big thing. The other thing I think we are, and again, it wasn't planned, and it's an interesting coincidence actually of the times, was that I was almost an unwavering, is that correct word, optimist. Like everyone, if people would come with ideas. Initially, I would go with ideas because I would reach out, right? I was very new. All this thing wasn't yet embedded as deeply. But after a while, the more small wins that we did, more and more people would come to ideas. I doubt I ever said, no, that's not possible, right? Obviously, I didn't say, let's do everything because I was not enough people or hours in the day. I don't think there was any moment, I mean, within reason, right? That I ever said, no, that's impossible, right? And I think if you do that, but you actually mean it in the sense, you're not just saying it, you actually mean it. That, if we fight and struggle and fail a few times, we can make some progress in this problem, right? Then it's kind of like, yeah, it's not infectious, but it's kind of like it spreads, that feeling spreads. And not with everyone, but even like a small percentage of people that we collaborated with, they went away with that sort of understanding. And of course, with an even smaller percentage, maybe we did show, wins and stuff, right? Or gains, so they went away with that I hope they shared also with their peers, right? That sort of like optimism about what the technology can do. Now, because I like to be modest, like obviously I was working in a space and with a technology that is almost magic, right? And I believe that already from 2022 that I joined, and actually from 2018 or 19 where we saw the first DALI layouts or something. I actually believe that it was magic even before there was Opus 4.5. So we do have an advantage, right? It wasn't, I don't know, thinking back in the years I would work like in the environmental space, trying, putting incredible effort for like a minor change in
Mm.
some sort of aspect of a project or a design versus like, so there is an advantage, but still that advantage on its own, it doesn't do anything. So that optimism I think was huge. And then it's just like a great team and great culture in a way. You need champions. We had champions. So that helped a lot. Like it actually changed everything. One of the big things that actually created that culture had maybe very little or little to do with me was the company actually coming out and putting a strategy at the top, at the leadership around this very early on. I want to say before most others in the domain. And that completely changed things, right? So but we already had prepared that ground for that moment. So like when it changed, people were like, "Oh, now I can do more of those cool things that we did with here, right?" And the team. So I think that's what it was. Of course, like there is always like, I don't know if we went through like the sort of trial, disillusionment, and all the stuff. There was a hype, right? And I think now where we are is that people, they have a lot more maturity, so the culture is there. Like they want to explore, and we're finding more and more ways for self enablement in a way, empowering everyone to explore. But we're also getting much more mature in the technology. And I think we can now finally tackle much more complex problems. We could tackle them before, but now we have like ways and infrastructure and ideas around how to solve them. And I think this is the second wave of sort of optimism and maybe a new cultural aspect of like, now it's about core engineering and how we do the future work. And yeah, so it's very exciting. And it's going to be another very exciting year, interesting year because we're in a transition phase, but very exciting year. Transition phase in the technology itself. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, hope it did.
Yeah, like I got the overall picture. I wanted to know a bit more on the on the practices side. Let's say it's common that when a generative AI leader comes, they propose like few internal products. Let's build a platform for documents, and then another challenge can be like not many people are using the internal AI platform. So do you like we hear the champion based approach? sometimes difficult to scale across all the firm or people using it. So how do you build routines? Or do you do weekly check-in with those champion? How do you ensure the adoption? Like all those
Yeah.
things that moves the needle.
Yeah. Yeah. On our end, I mean, I think to be honest, like the champion approach, I do think like it's not that it wasn't part of what we did. We still have champions and we also champion this technology heavily. But again, I think like, I don't want to say it's not needed, but it's a much different approach to how you would champion something else. Cause like, almost every other technology that I've used, I sort of needed a champion to sort of get into it or needed to be convinced. This technology, I feel a lot of people like, again, you just see it and it's magic. So I think it's much easier to champion through solutions that actually work, that. And going back to like, if this is a wave of digital transformation, and you championed digital transformation before and it was a painful process, I think, and again, this is just my view, I wouldn't say I'm the most experienced in digital transformation, but at least before AI. But I feel maybe now it actually works because it's a technology that does transform things and people actually want to like adopt it and they can adopt it in their own way. So like the technology, I want to say that it did a lot of the heavy lifting, but of course you needed to create the conditions for it to become available, useful, right? Like you do need like, especially early on and still, to be honest, you need to build like scaffolding and infrastructure and applications around it to help users enter the space. But I think like, and that's going to be the interesting bit of this year, more and more of that is going away because one, there is a lot of work being done at the whole domain for the stuff, but also users are getting more experienced and models are getting better. So like we're seeing and I'm seeing a shift daily at the technology level, not internally, sort of like a much more natural way of using these models to do complex work. So like, yeah. But yeah, going back to your question, I think like we did have champions and we have programs and internal programs and change management approaches, all the stuff that you can imagine across all organizations and other organizations have it and had it for sure. But also this technology is just amazing and it really helped a lot if you build things that provided value, right? And so yeah, that's kind of like I think. So yeah, we build like I think very good platforms and products to start. We collaborated a lot with teams internally to solve like specific problems, sort of like almost like point solutions, which eventually became workflows, even though early on we didn't have workflows in mind. And that also was a big way of championing. And the last bit that we're doing is, as I said, that this sort of actual community championing where we want to hear from others how they solve daily problems with AI. And that's a very interesting thing because when we started, we thought, okay, we will need to like champion this a bit ourselves, right? Let's show a couple of things that we've done. People maybe get an idea what we're looking for. They can come out with their own. We didn't have to do any of that. Like people were just, there were actually so many people actually solving problems daily, right? So that's where we are now. As maturity goes up, like I think just the solution and the value champions this technology itself.
Mm. Were there any experiments and you tried that didn't work?
Oh, so many. Yes. A lot. The one thing that I started saying this is going to be a bit controversial, although most people that know me probably have heard it. It's okay. I think I started saying it about a year ago. Obviously, right? And we can discuss this later. These models are amazing. They still can do domain specific tasks well enough. They have, like humans, they have this jagged intelligence still. They are very good, sharp at some stuff, very bad at surprisingly easy stuff, right? All these problems. And the solution to that early on and even still was like, actually, early on, it was retrieval, right? We called it. Now it's sort of context engineering, whatever, right? Is actually bringing that knowledge that is necessary, right? But it's almost the same. So RAG and context engineering, it's almost the same, but it has a very subtle difference. And one of the big, I think, failures in the sense like it never works the way you need it to work is actually RAG as a whole. This is controversial perhaps. Like I will say RAG doesn't work, but what do I mean? At the level of consistency and accuracy that you require to execute complex tasks in the real world of architecture, engineering, construction, right? Is simply not. Like, I think I wrote about this on LinkedIn. I dialed it down to like two use cases for RAG. One is I'm completely new in a field. I want to learn something. I'm very robust to like, some errors, I'm happy to discover. right? So I ask a question, I get some answers, I follow one thread, I see it goes nowhere, maybe it was a mistake, I go back, I follow the other thread, I find something new, I keep following, right? I'm very happy with it. I get like information in my fingertips. That's one good use case of RAG. The other is like the complete expert that is literally just looking. It's kind of like they're looking for that page they have in mind. They already know the answer. They just want to quickly validate, right? It's almost like a search, like the old school search. Those are the two use cases that I think have consistent value. Anything in between is very hard. So a lot of the failures was around us fighting in a way with retrieval of complex information from messy and multimodal data across many spaces. That was a lot of the failures were there. And the big sort of like realization for me and then a bit for our products was to say, okay, that's enough. This will never work. So I think we did context engineering a bit before it became a fad. And I'm a bit sad because I think I was saying it the word to the team a couple of weeks before Karpath made that post that became famous. Yeah. But we did a lot of that before, which was really like transitioning from, and that's the subtle difference of RAG and context engineering. Like with RAG, you're sort of like, hey, let's hope we find what we need. Here's the collection of stuff we brought. With context engineering, you're now saying, this is not a general purpose tool. This is solving specific problems. This is exactly the information you need, right? So a lot of the failures was around RAG, especially in the things we learn about users interacting with those systems, right? Like again, those two categories they did very well, one better than the other actually. But a lot of the time we saw like, domain experts not reacting well to like even the smallest failures of this technology, right? And especially in an environment of a new technology, which is also like under a microscope, right? But once you switch to context engineering, one, you embed domain experts. This is like the thing that we started with. We literally wrote a few principles early on. The first maybe few months we started. One of them was that like we need to embed domain expertise. That was the vehicle to do it, the workflows. And then because you do that, people actually are part of the process, right? So yeah, that was I think the biggest failures were experiment around retrieval. And it's not like that we couldn't make improvements, right? We could make improvements. We had like at the end we have, and still we have like probably technology that is orders of magnitude better. And I'm sure people will come out if they're actually watching this, watching me or something, might say, yeah, we can do graphs or we can do like, knowledge graphs and all this stuff. Everything works, but nothing really works at the consistency you want it to work, like every time, all the time, right? So I think that was the biggest one. And the other one, like more general, was again that realization that had nothing to do with drug actually. The realization that while this magical technology can be an incredible tool inside its domain, which is pretty much code, math, and general language stuff, but like just language. It wasn't as good outside of the domain. And that's what I said just earlier that that gap was a big realization. And a lot of the errors that we saw went from misspecification of tasks in the beginning. That was the most common error. It still is for people building things with AI. They can't that you don't specify correctly to actually figuring out that it's not actually your specification, is actually the model just cannot handle it, right? So that was another, there were failures around that as well. That were good. Yeah, I think those are the main ones. It's really about, yeah. And it's interesting because most of that, apart from the last bit, and even the last bit, is around the models. It's not the models themselves. The models just kept getting better, right? For almost everything, like every dry task that we do anyways. Like they're not more creative or like they're not writing novels or anything, but we don't want them to do that. But they were getting better. But yeah, it's just like the things around it that, yeah, they weren't wrong necessarily. We were just focusing on the wrong things, right? Like and still, I think there's still like, yeah, if we go to value and like what will remain, I have thoughts there. Like the general stuff, they won't remain.
On that lines, it's getting easier and easier to make a MVP, vibe
Mm,
code it,
yes.
and it's difficult to get a production ready app that works. What
Uh-huh.
are the uncool things one has to do? Like, okay, the interface we see, the workflow we see is a cool, fun part. A lot of data cleaning, data structuring, foundation, those are like unsexy work. Like, if you can share, like, okay, what are those backend
Yeah.
things which are important?
Yeah, I think, look, first of all, I think, again, like, vibe coding is amazing. It's gotten a bad rap because people focus too much on the vibe coding era. I think you can absolutely have tools in production. If you are, yeah, experienced in how you interact with these models, not necessarily senior developer or something like that, but it actually helps, obviously. But definitely with a team, like a small team could bring things in production like that. So like the gaps usually, and that's part of the things no one wants to do, is like all the last mile part. So for example, thinking of production, I can build like a full stack application that is fully functional locally, right? Beautiful performance, secure, zero issues in SonarQube and all the stuff in a stack that I have no idea about. I've actually been doing that the last 3 months. I've been building like Rust and Svelte stack. I didn't know anything about it. Every single one works, right? That last mile of like going from local to deploying to infrastructure, that's I think the gap. But that gap is there not because models don't know how to do it, but because most of us haven't codified the processes that make that gap, create that gap, right? Once you codify the processes, everything else is already automated. That's the whole idea of CI/CD, right? That's the whole idea of automation and pipelines, and like everything is automated. And if you ask DevOps and our DevOps team, probably they will say, yeah, we have all the scripts to spin up all the resources, all configured as properly. But there is a tiny gap there that I think we're trying to close now of like how to bring those two worlds together. So I think that's the big part. That's the one part. I think the one part like connecting sort of like the full stack development with infrastructure, that connection is one of the things very few people are working on because it requires both parties as well. And also it requires both parties in not the traditional way you would do it. Traditional, you would be like, I build the application, here's a ticket, right? Let's review and let's see what do I need to configure. Then once you take over and you go do the configuration. Then you tell me, this is what you know. It was a sort of like back and forth over a span period of time with tickets and agile development. But now, like, you just need like a few hours between a full stack and a DevOps and you have it, right? That's it. It's just a few hours. But so to automate that process that would be possible in a few hours, you actually need to sit down with them for that purpose. And it's almost like you need a workshop, right? You can't really do it through the agile process. You can't say, I made this full stack application is very good. I followed all our principles. I cleaned all the issues. Everything checks out. I vibe coded it. I actually, right? Now I want to deploy it. You can't really do with AI. You can't build the AI automation around it through the traditional process. It's simply not going to work. You need to be like, okay, let's sit down now and do it. So that's another thing that we want to do early, and everyone is probably wants to do early, because if you close these sort of gaps, you create a world with like solutions, not products, are almost immediate. That's an incredible world, right? We can talk about the business model I think that has around it later, but I think like you can build solutions around complex problems very fast, right? But that last mile is the problem. So that's one. The other thing is that everyone wants to work with agents. Everyone loves to build agents. Everyone, it's amazing, right? It's nice. Everyone uses coding agents and they work really well. So of course they focus on agents. Not a lot of people want to build the harness and the scaffolding and the workflow it's not even the tools, like how do you find, and even when they do work on the harness, they kind of work at the agent skill mode, which is amazing. But that mode of like, yeah, whatever, I don't need to connect all this. Here's a folder, figure it out, right? That's what the skill is, right? A bit better. And then you have like again a magical technology like Opus and says, no worries, I got it. I understand from what you told me, if it was clear, how to use it. A lot of people love to work there. I love to work there. I have skills and all the stuff like everyone, but less people are working on the workflow side and on the harness and on the small details and nuances of how that works, because it's not as sexy in ways, right? It's not, you know. Then the last bit, even probably, and now we're going down the scale of like what people don't want to work on. The last one is actually the data. And by data, I mean, this is an interesting thing. I thought it was really smart when I posted on LinkedIn. To be honest, I don't post on LinkedIn anymore, so I didn't really get a lot of traction. Also, I didn't have emojis and all the stuff on it that are a requirement. But it's this idea that I think I said it was a joke from Discord in AI for years, like, oh, we need to train on our benchmarks. That was the motto of the post, right? No one got it, it's okay. But the idea was that why would you train on the benchmark? You obviously don't train on a benchmark. The whole idea of the benchmark is to evaluate what you have. One, we don't have benchmarks. Like I saw a very nice, ACV that came out. It's nice. One task. Imagine like we have thousands of tasks. We have no benchmark that covers even small percentage of that, right? So of course you collect the benchmark to evaluate, right? Solutions, models, ourselves. How do we do, right? In different directions, right? You evaluate accuracy, you evaluate value, you evaluate time, efficiency, like all this stuff. But my post was like, we should train on the benchmark, which means, and this is like probably the hardest work to do. And that's what I want to do for the next year a lot. Is like not only you define a benchmark with just an example, which can again be very open-ended, or here's a drawing, figure it out. How well do you do, right? But actually around every task, every one task of the thousands of tasks you can find, build a harness and an environment of experience. And actually, so essentially is the previous thing that people don't want to do times 1,000, which you also do in a task that you know nothing about. The expert knows, right? So you need access to experts. You need experts who are willing to take part in that. It's not easy, especially they're very busy. So imagine like you need to tell them, take a moment, and instead of solving this task, tell me how you do you solve it, right? It's like but very few people are doing this. We might be doing it across the industry anecdotally, right? Oh, and it's interesting because like people are doing it anecdotally and building products around this stuff, right? That's what the products are. Most of the products, X task product, right?
Mm.
Instead, we need like a benchmark that maps these tasks, then finds examples, real examples around these tasks, then builds harnesses around each of these tasks. And for those that don't know, the harness is just the scaffolding, the tools around that needed to solve, right? We know all this stuff. We solve them every day. And then once you have all of that, you have environments where you can train. So like once you have one or two examples of a task, you can't really train. That's the benchmark. If you even if you train, you get no performance. But if you have a harness, now I can maybe procedurally give it inputs. Maybe I can synthesize inputs, right? And because my harness is defined, I know how to evaluate it. I have KPIs and tolerances and I know the formulas I'm using, the tools, right? And then we can start spinning. So that's the last bit that very few want to do. But going back to my comment 2, 3 comments ago, it's the only way to close the gap. There's no other way. And it is happening. And you can see this happening in coding, right? So if you go to like Sweatbench, all this stuff, right? The last exam, all the big RKGI, right? That's the whole purpose, right? Their whole purpose, and of course the models, that's the joke, they do train on ArcGI. They will train on the train set. And not only do they train, ArcGI is a good example because they don't just train on the train set. A lot of models train on the environment. So they reverse engineer the problem because the problem is, to be honest, like a bit procedural. And then they create a generator around the task. And then they press the button continuously on the generator and they create infinite data and they train. So that's kind of like where we can get. It's much harder on our end because we're not RKGI. Like it's not like, colors and boxes. It's actual examples. We don't have infinite examples, right? Yeah. But I think that's the lower end of the work that very few want to do. And it's almost all I would like to do for the next year. It won't be all. In a way, it will be all because on top of that, you build everything, right? Every problem you solve internally or for clients, it's a task, it's an environment, it's part of the benchmark. Everything you create can be part of that. So the good thing about I want to have that as a foundation because like you can build everything on top of it, right? And so in this way, it's not something out here, and that's interesting because like it's not easy. You need some effort to explain that. Like another reason these tasks are not so popular is like people won't see the value immediately, right? So like, should I do a benchmark or should I build a product, right? Like that solves something now. So like this way, if you position it, is not actually a benchmark, is like a mapping of what we do and how we do it so that we can actually teach these models how to solve everything we do with us, then it becomes something more valuable. Right? But yeah, definitely this is not on many people's radar, right? Even the to be honest, even the benchmarks that are coming out, you can see it. They are myopic on purpose strategically, right? We are still at the point of like, here's my benchmark. And it helps position me or like my work in a way, right? So now we need like, here's a benchmark where I have no stake in because it really maps all of our work. So, like you can't really sell all of engineering, right? But in there, you will find a lot of value for everyone. So it's kind of like, that's where we are. And all of that, like it's all, again, it's the only way to close the gap. It's the only way to get quality outputs. It's the only way to improve. That's what happened. Like if anyone goes to Sweatbench over time, they can see that happening, right? And the same happens in Sweatbench. The examples inside there we were reverse engineered to like generators to create examples. So that's where we are. Uh, I don't know. Again, a long answer, but
Yeah,
those three things, I think, climbing down the ladder of what I don't want to do, what I want to do less. Those are yeah.
that's like you just gave me so many ideas. Like when you were describing it, I was thinking like wouldn't be a great end-to-end framework or playground where let's say I wanna have train a new task. I
Yep.
could screen share, show it. AI could ask bunch of questions. What's your thinking process of let's say designing a bridge in a particular
Yeah.
software? Then there's like easy way to create harness, tool calling, easy
Yeah.
way to like create the few, and that becomes a whole skill, and it's just a amazing
Exactly.
playground.
And I do think these things will come up. Like more and more people will build this. Obviously, this is not like super novel. Like already is happening in AI. There is, everything is around post training, which is the word around RL post training, which is the word around this environment people use to train things, so like everything, like most of the focus now there, I think everything before that is like super high end engineering that is probably squeezed out as much as we can. So everything is on the data layer now. So data is now the bottleneck, but like, in fact, I don't think data is the bottleneck. This sort of environments of experience is the bottleneck. And there is absolutely space for solutions that allow people to map tools interactively. Yeah, absolutely. And like anything, like you could map a task that you know in a session with one of these models, and at the end you can be like, "Oh, I'm happy with this. Here's my skill workflow environment." You're right. So I'm expecting this to uh, happen both centrally from applications. So, for example, Prime Intellect is a good example. They have, verifiers now is part of Prime Intellect, which is like a very early repo for all the stuff, code base. And like you can get community environments, hundreds of them on their side in Prime Intellect, right? Maybe we can have community environments for engineering. Because to be honest, most of the tasks that we have, they're open, they're public, right? How do I calculate? I don't know, some sort of aspects of a retaining wall. It's just a formula we learn in high school. So I would love if it happened like bottom down as well, but yeah, like central in a way from a community. But I do expect it also to happen anecdotally in a way like, and we've been doing this for a while. Every time we solve a problem, we're trying to create a sort of an environment around it, like a harness, right? So what is the things that I need to put around the model so it can do this task? Like the expert. So like that's all of our work, right? So yeah, you could have a
Mm.
software doing that. Maybe I mean again, when you get to that space, it could work not well. But the cool thing is in that problem, I think it wouldn't work like end to end. Definitely not. Like this is my guess to people who want to develop this startup or whatever. But it would work well enough as a first step to because like we keep saying, right, it's much easier to evaluate and correct and generate. So definitely I could imagine like a thing that quickly creates an initial scaffolding that you take to a workshop or something for fine tuning with experts. Yeah, that'd be really cool. And that
Mm.
is almost the other reason maybe that's not a startup idea is almost Opus and 5.2 can do that already. Like, it's almost, the models are almost there for that. All you need is a bit of nice interaction. Yeah. But you can make it easier for everyone. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. And we do have, for example, we do have workflows and skills to do things, and we also have skills and workflows that create skills and workflows. So you can imagine this loop as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw there was this skill creator where we can create
Yeah.
any new skill. I was watching a recent interview of Andrew NG, and he touched upon
Cool.
a topic that uh, product manager and good design taste would be like a
Oh yeah.
important skill. What are your thoughts on like what's a great skill to develop in this era?
I mean, the taste is interesting because, like, I do think you can get a lot of value with like very little taste in a way. Like, you do need interaction eventually, but yeah, if you're an expert at something, you can create a lot of value right now, even without anyone saying anything. If not, I do understand why the taste because, like, eventually you need to have like a user experience around what you're building. I think like right now, I don't know how to explain it. Like it's not necessarily like it's not a talent, it's not something innate at all. That's why I want to start. It's hard for me to explain, but it's very easy to show. So if we do a session with like a model and it's like the biggest skill, like one of the biggest things right now is to like learn how to meaningfully collaborate with these models. This is what opens the door to everything. And what I mean collaborate is really not prompting, is not like, it's literally sitting down and co-creating something with a model almost on equal terms. To be honest, we are not on equal terms. Like models do much more than we do. But from the start, like if you get to a point where you don't even have to think about doing that, you're just doing it. Hey, let's work on this today. Where were we? Okay, like, and you go through like, as a collaborator, that's the first skill. That's very good news. Like, it's very powerful skill. If you can build that with practice and routine, there's nothing innate about that, right? Obviously, you need to believe in this technology. You need to be open, right, and all the stuff. And the other thing I think is like, yeah, like being able to like delegate. That's interesting. But before delegate, being able to like, again, this you can learn to sort of like being able to focus a lot more on the plan than the detail. So that's also, it's not so difficult because it requires practice or skill. It's very difficult because it's not how we used to do things. Like might feel a bit insecurity by doing that because you're like, "Well, now I step back and something happens." But of course, if you step back after you spend a lot of time and focus and effort in planning and designing sort of like your specs and all the stuff, like there's a lot of spec driven development right now. That's how everyone is working at the highest level, but at the level where you get most of the value is all spec driven development. So like that's very important, like being able to work in that mode. So like sort of plan, see a few things ahead, and then being able to very quickly, again, third thing is to be intuitive, slightly innate, like you need to be like, just have some intuition, but you can also build that. And being intuitive is just being attentive, like on what's going on, what's happening, like being able to get like small, obviously you need to know a few things as well, but like if you are intuitive enough, you can very quickly find modes of failure, like very quickly like understand where things are moving away from what you suggested and all the stuff. I think like all this stuff, like I would say like all the critical thinking and open mind, but whatever, this is always. But I think the most important skills now, they're all around learning meaningful collaboration with these models. And yeah. And it's interesting because it doesn't happen. It takes a while to happen. I'm trying sometimes to go back in time and remember if there was a time where it clicked or something, or if there was, I don't think there was. I want to say that it was maybe 3.5 where the, the model started really to be able to collaborate at almost like at equal terms with you. Not in the data crunching sense, they were already much better even before, but like equal terms of like actually understanding what you're going for and like, you know, taking that and moving forward. I want to say it was 3.5. And I want to say like that was interesting. It was 3.5 and the web UI in Anthropic. So like both things have improved vastly since then. So we went from 3.5 to like so many models, like 2 generations ahead. And then from a web UI with no engineering to like cloud code and all the open code and copilot, like a lot of hardness and engineering, right? So now is the time to do that. I would say those are the two biggest things. The other stuff you just have, like if you're a domain expert, that's the other, I don't know if this is another one. Like obviously domain expertise is like, secret sauce, right? Like I can, if you don't know anything, like you sit down and you do what, right? You just ask the model what to do. But if you know one thing very well, you can build a solution around it. Okay. But then the interesting bit is like, obviously, if you're the more expert you are in something, the harder it can be, it's not always, to get out of that space and into the mode I'm describing, into the mode of like, okay, now I can delegate, plan, and distribute. And I don't need to actually always be, micromanaging in a way, right? And so, yeah, that's the thing. That's now the skills. That will change really fast because everything will improve. So, like, already we have, skills and modes and everyone's, I don't know if people have seen like Ralph Wiggum and all the stuff. Like, already we have tools that allow you to do better around that. Maybe in 1 year we have tools that just do it for you. Like I don't know. But we are moving more and more into this like, idea space. And it's interesting because obviously if you were coding, this is all in the coding aspect, right? We are still in development because that's where the models do well in coding, right? So this is in building solutions around products, backend, frontend, or even calculations. But the things that are happening is like we're moving more and more to spec development. And also and it's interesting because like if you talk with like software engineers and developers, and my team is assembled by people like that, is like there is a bit of hesitance of like, what is the future of coding? What interesting though, if you think like what we've always been doing is we've always been trying to make computers do what we want, right? That's all. That's what coding was, right? And I think is interesting, like coding now with AI models, it's much closer to the early years of coding than anything in between. It's much closer to that magic of like an incredible technology I can use to like do things, right? Everything in between was about, I feel like slowly, kind of like not commercializing, but like institutionalizing that feeling, right? But now suddenly you're back into that magic, right? And yes, you're still using language, some language. It's not Fortran, it's English to make computers do what you want. Like, so nothing has changed, right? Even though everything is changing.
Do you think like this collaboration is the way people collaborate with this model is the difference between X programmer and 100x and 1000x? Like, or
Yeah.
it's more systems, unique insights.
Yeah. I don't know if there is 10x programmers anymore. Like, there's obviously people that can do better, but these models, I think they flatten the curve a lot. Obviously, there's still a lot of margin, right? And people will disagree here. And I know friends from AI would disagree heavily. Like there's still like maybe there's both sides of this. Like the models can flatten that curve a lot, right? Which can be frightening if you were X or whatever that means. But they're also like so powerful that small differences can have like almost like that jagged performance that we're saying. So like they are flattening, I think, a lot in distribution. So like a lot of people can build amazing stuff now, but they still have that sort of like 10, 1000x at the areas outside of distribution, which is like where we operate. So yeah, I can see a lot of impact in areas like ours because it's not yet like, not everything yet is clear. Like we're still discovering sort of like the way, right? So for that amount of time, I think yes, they can be the difference from like incredible improvements in efficiency and even like innovation and what you can do. But that will sort of like reduce in a good sense as we move forward because everything that we find, just the example of benchmark as well, we will formalize and create tools around the models will embed it. Yeah, but I think there is, but interestingly, more outside of code than inside. I think inside of code is much flatter. Like all you need is good ideas and again, intuitions and all this stuff, right? Which is, yeah, I know, interesting.
I see. Yeah. My thinking was like, okay, the people who operate at high level, they have built like sub agents that run in background and everything.
I don't know if this metaphor, not metaphor, analogy will make more sense, but like I feel like engineers who code, and I'm talking to like AC engineers, their potential is like their potential can be very close to software developers who code with AI. Software developers who engineer with I think have higher potential. So like, so that's what I mean by the asymmetry. Like in code, these models are already like so good, the harnesses are so good that, you know, we all kind of like are close to the ceiling, right? Or like the floor is very high. In outside of code, the harness is so important that if you come from a place where you know what that means and what it is, you can quickly build something that is 100 times better. So that's the analogy, right?
Mhm.
And so maybe it's not about people, it's about maturity.
You briefly mentioned about the business model side. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah. So I wish like the people who see this, I wish they only comment on this because I'm very curious. So I've said this a few times. I don't know if I've said it publicly. I want to remember if I wrote it somewhere, but I probably implicitly refer to it. So first of all, I've been talking about workflows for years. People are for a year, let's say, or more. And people are actually tired of me saying workflows, right? At some point, and I think like we are. Even though I could see that coming for a while now, we're still not in a place where workflows are everything, right? But we are, I think, in a transition phase, in a sort of tipping point. And at some point, I will try to draw it, maybe with Nano Banana, because I can draw. What I mean by that, we're in a tipping point where we can see over, or at least I can. But there is a part, maybe a part of us that is not yet over that line, right? So, like, if I give a real example, so imagine you're at the firm in AC and you're trying, you know, you're working on a workflow, right? An AI workflow. Someone asks you something very easy. What's the easiest stuff? Like maybe something around language, right? Like let's write a report or whatever. Uh, And you're like, sure, we can do this. It's very nice. We can save a lot of time, right? How long does it take you to run on this report? Oh, it takes like 3 people a week. No worries. In a couple of weeks, we build a workflow. It takes like 3 people, 3 hours, right? Amazing. And you save some money. You can get higher quality, you can get more efficiency, you don't just save money, but you save on cost as well. You get like more satisfaction, like everyone actually saves. The client or the other internal team takes everything faster. It's a win-win, right? But that it's still so small compared to a large project for the same client or the same team. So imagine like trying to convince people. I think that's the counterintuitive thing that we are in now. That this little thing over here that we are doing is not just cool, right? It's not just a quick innovation automation. It's not just like a bit of innovation and eminence, right? But it's actually the future of how this whole big project here will be delivered in like probably like a year or two, right? So that's the tipping point. Like those point solutions that are cool to have, nice to do, right? Like they have value, they're wins. Everyone is, we're all positive around them. Those are too small in a way to matter for everyone compared to like the bigger projects. But at the same time, they're exactly how we will delivering almost the bulk of every project in the future, in the near future. So that's, I think, where we find ourselves now. I think the people who realize this the fastest and say, okay, let's find some way to balance towards this counterintuitive, less valuable, seemingly valuable thing, I think they will win, right? Like in the sense they will win. Like we all win. We will all use this technology. Like, but I think they will be ahead, right? Like, and again, it's counterintuitive, right? Because it's just a point solution, a little AI workflow. What does it mean, right? Like 3 people save some time, right? But what if every single task that you do in a project is solved in that way? So that's the kind of future where we, I think, heading, or almost every task, right? So that's I think, and what's the business model around this? So that's the other discussion, of course. Like on the one side is this counterintuitive of like right now is too small, but tomorrow it could be everything. So how do you balance that? The other bit is like, okay, but it's also very different than how we not value our work, but how we maybe price our work as an industry, right? Like how we approach and not even how the industry does it, how the typical, project, scope, contract, whatever might be, right? So how do you balance that? And I think the way to do it is like I think the way to do it is again, I think workflows will be the vehicle of work, right? The future of work around and workflow skills. It's the different side of the same coin, autonomy coin, right? Like that's what we are. So that would be the future, the vehicle of work. And the way I think we can transition towards that in a nice way would be to say, to realize, again, going back to the gap that exists right now, to realize that to make workflows that can deliver meaningful work in projects, you need actual expertise wrapped around them. So that's kind of like this idea. And I think I wrote about this, and that's why I'm going to mention it, this idea of workflow as a service. And the minute I mention this, people's mind goes to like SaaS, which is funny. It makes software as a service. It's nothing to do with that, right? Like, so like this is our fear. Our fear was like, so AI agents and workflows will become SaaS, right? So like everything that we do gets externalized into an API call, and like, none of this works. None of it. Like the stuff that we do in projects, you cannot, like not none, but very few things you can do. Instead, what you do is like you build, again, going back to the benchmark and the mapping of the tasks that we do as an industry and the mapping of the tasks that we do individually or whatever, and building like little environments around them. Instead, what you do is like at projects, you map the tasks that you have to do. You cross-reference with like, oh, okay, these 10 environments seem close to these tasks, but they're not the same. Every client, project, instance, and region will need adjustment. That adjustment requires expertise and professional services. And that's exactly what you do. It's not very different than, any other professional service around the technology, right? Only this time is actually fun. It's actually like going back to like, for example, when I was doing like thermal comfort and wind comfort and this sort of stuff, like essentially like, I wouldn't deliver to clients and projects a CFD simulation. Like what are they going to do with that, right? you would deliver like a report, an analysis, something around that, wrapped, right? That's your expertise, right? That's the same idea now, only that wrapping that expertise makes that tasks now a much more scalable, sometimes automated or semi-automated. Perhaps like, you can scale across projects, across programs, client, doesn't really matter. So like it makes it much more robust and much more scalable. So that's the difference. The difference is that instead of doing, everything from scratch for every project that I used to do back then, for example, thermal comfort, I would have templates and workflows and all built through domain expertise, all adjusted per project, per requirements, per asset type, whatever is the task to work. So that's kind of like, I think the business model that fits right now. And it's interesting because like I like it because it positions us really well. Because to follow that business model, you need high quality, world class expertise engineering, which we have, and really high quality, I would say like world class AI engineering and expertise, which we have. So like you need both, right? And I think yeah, that's kind of like the way forward. And the good thing, the other cool thing about this is that the domain expertise is at the core. You're not, like, and I know we all say we're not replacing, we're augmenting, but this is the actual way you do it. Because sometimes we just say it. Like, because some people would say we're not replacing, we're augmenting, and yet, I can sit for 2 hours talking to you, and in the background, an application is being built. Okay. And so, like, was that not replaced in a way? But in this case, is actual literally augmenting. Why? Because we work in a much more messy environment in the real world with different requirements. So there is always that need. It's just that we direct that knowledge and need and focus and work not towards a point solution for a project, but towards a reusable, sustainable solution for the project and the client and the program, whatever that might be, which is that workflow. And yeah, it's really cool actually. So yeah, that it's a bit long-winded again, but that's how I see it. And it again, it might not be very. I'm sure like thousands of people are thinking the same, right? I'm sure, and I've seen probably people already doing that, right? That's what they're doing. They have, but it's a bit different. I've seen a lot of people doing AI as a service kind of stuff where they're like, "Hey, Ace, let me show you how you do these AI workflows." I think it's the opposite. That is the key, which is like, "Hey, AI, let me show you how actually engineering happens." And yeah, that's kind of what organizations like us can do, I think, right?
This is like a whole big discussion in itself. But like the way you said it, it felt like S was productivized thing. You do this task. In engineering service, every project is so different and nuanced that you can't literally productivize this. And
Yeah.
skills, and with this AI, we have some possibility that we can choreograph a template which can do a lot of this, which wasn't possible before.
Exactly.
And ultimately, you started with, okay, 3 weeks to 3 days, an ROI driven approach with, again, automate a task. Now I was wondering, let's say client gives millions for a design firm to do, and multiple stakeholders, multiple tasks. It's like a whole hierarchy of things that needs to be done. And sometimes like I feel like if ROI driven approach could be like optimizing for short term, like there could be a task which might not have a direct ROI, but it's needed for the whole thing to like work. So
Yeah,
that
I can see that happening at the project level and even above that. So like the clearest way of optimizing for short term is not moving. Okay, if you believe me and if you believe like me that that might be the direction we should move or whatever, not moving towards there is the first easiest like short term optimization. You can be like, I'll do it later. Let me just do what I was doing, right? So that happens at the even like the approach level. It could be like at the how you define a whole project proposal or bid or approach, right? And then inside I could see it also happening. But I think like at that point is much easier to like make headway once that approach is inside a project or a client relationship or something. It's much easier to like make headway because it's there, right? Like, and what something that I do try to do more and more is like be very clear in that section of AI. If you have like if you imagine a proposal and there is a section of here's how AI workflows happen, right? At that level, you have to be, I think like it goes back to something we follow a lot where we like to show things, real things, and not just presentations, right? in a proposal, you cannot do that. But instead, what do you say? Instead of, sort of discussing general AI stuff that you could put, placeholders, instead, you're thinking at this specific project, for this specific client at this specific time and this scope, here's the specific ways AI is embedded and workflows are created around this X whatever important tasks, right? So like if you do that, you like so again, it's almost like going back to workflows, it's almost like workflow. You specify very clearly what you mean and what you might do. And once you do that, then you actually have to do it. So like essentially someone reads this, right? So if they like it, you do it. So that's how you can avoid that. Because of course, like if you could easily imagine like saying something more superficial during the proposal stage. And then maybe he wins and it probably doesn't win because of you, but maybe helps. Like, nice, we had innovation there and AI. And then after that happens, AI doesn't happen because whatever, we never described what it was anyways. We got it. Now we can continue as we used to do. Right. So I think that would happen if you don't take care in like fully specify it. And to do that, you need a very clear approach, like strategic approach and very implementation approach, technology approach on how these things would work. I think we have it. So like it's not very difficult to say here's exactly what we mean by an AI approach for this project, for example, or this client. Like we can be very detailed. And I think that's the way. And it's also a win-win, right? Because like you're helping, essentially providing more detail, more information, more maturity to what is being offered. And if you win, you get the chance to do it, right? Like so I think that's I don't know of any other because like once generally work starts in our industry, right? It's just like there's no stop, right? It's always like
Yeah.
I'm running behind. So you can't be like, yeah, we'll figure it out later. It doesn't work. If you do that, people will immediately revert to what they know. I would do the same. We would all do the same. Oh, we don't have time. This didn't work. Let me go back to like. But if you are confident and you have mature technology, you know how you're gonna use it for each of the projects, then you can write it in detail, and then you just hold your word and do it. That's it. I think that's the best way to do it. Yeah.
I'm just trying to think, let's what in the abstract sense, how should one think about, let's say for a bridge design, like analysis, structural analysis is a repeatable task. It's just like the exact thing changes per project. But in, let's say, computational design, when I'm doing facade, there might be one-off custom scripts I could create which might not be used across future projects. So is then one should think like, okay, for this scenario, I should build a template creator of facade optimization and maybe the nuances for a particular project. I'll add custom components. What's the level of thinking of, am I
Yeah.
creating a template? Am I creating a task
Yeah.
automation?
So I think if we describe the skill is easier because the skill is easier to describe to people than the workflow. So essentially, if you think of like your example, computation design, right? You would absolutely have specific examples. So one of the things you would add in the skill is like, here's an example of how I did in a similar project. Okay. Maybe along with a write up, and here's the summary of that project scope or requirements. And then you would have, definitely you would have like, here's this project requirements, right? And here's maybe the standards they need to follow. Here's their goals, or what that you would do. So like you would definitely have the template, right? With is like, and you could pre-templatize some things that are higher than client or design specific, which might be regions or market industries, like here's the how in Australia, here's the standard for this thing, right? That's how we all follow. Here's the baseline, right? So you can imagine a baseline and then adjusting. Here's the interesting thing. Like I kept saying workflows are much more consistent than agents. Skills are getting us there, but skills require a lot of work as well. It's not like free. But one of the biggest values for agents right now, there are two. The one of the two I think are the biggest values. The one of them is exactly their ability to adapt pre-existing workflows to new context. Like not only your workflows or skill are already much more robust than your computation design script, because instead of giving it a script that should work everywhere, you give it like an example script, the rules of how to change it. Maybe or you also have like other ways to run calculations that were in your script in better environments like code, blah blah. So not only that thing is already more robust, but now you have a really intelligent agent you can collaborate with, again, going back to how you should work with them. to adjust this template to this new scope and context that you know very well and understand. So that's kind of like one use of agents that I see very powerful. Not agents in the automated sense, like, hey, fix this for me, in the collaborative. Like one use of like, let's call it, I don't know if I want to call it a chatbot still, but one use of that approach. Like, yeah, I think that's really powerful. And the other use that is related is in how do I actually use these workflows and why are they different than any automation script that you had before? Because now I have an agent that allows me to be, again, much more robust to the inputs. I can run these workflows without inputs. I can just say, that's where the inputs are in, go get them, right? Like, so they extend sort of the utility of your previous workflows. So yeah, that's how I would see it, like the adjustment. You could imagine doing it more programmatically. Like if you have a very fixed task that you know, like only the requirements change and not really the steps, you can imagine like programmatically, almost to your computational design script, right? Only again, you can imagine instead of parameters and inputs to actually give. I remember I saw this slide once at some, I forget what it was, but it had like, I don't know if I remember it, it had like a very detailed system of how we design a theme. I think it was maybe with computational design or not, right? Very detailed. And then it had a line here going, so that box was super detailed. All the software and scripts, how they connect, everything. You see it, you're like, this is really amazing. Like, and then on the left, there was an arrow like this and it said inputs. And of course, like that box never worked because actually getting those inputs was more work than actually designing that. Like, what are the inputs? Like, where do I find them? Actually, that was the whole work, right? So that part becomes a lot. We extend the workflows with AI, right? That's the other benefit. So yeah, that's how I think I would adjust. Like, it's a very, I don't want to say underestimated strength of like a collaboration right now, this adapting, continuously adapting workflows, but definitely something that will become more and more central as we move towards there. Yeah. So that's how I would do it, I think. Yeah.
God, I'm cautious of the time as we move towards the end. Anything from the AI research side in last 6 months which stood
Yeah.
out?
I think that the biggest thing again is the thing we discussed. That sort of like with Opus 4.5 and a bit with 5.2, a bit for different reasons. Like we're entering this space for at least in distribution tasks where our relationship with this task is changing fundamentally. Like we're still doing the same thing again, communicating with computers to do things only in different language. So that was a big change. It wasn't there before. Like we could do like, hack together things and slowly, step by step, but it wasn't there like, oh, if I take an hour to specify things with you, I can just go have lunch and come back to an application. Right? It wasn't there before. So that was a big, and that came from a lot of that kind of research that I mentioned. Like they build environments and they let the flywheel go, and they probably created billions and billions of iterations of each problem, right? And the other thing that I think was good, so like, and those two models embody that. So that's why I think it was a big thing. And I really liked also skills. I think skills were a big thing. I really love skills. I have an affinity for Anthropic. Like I really like them. A lot of their work. MCP was really good. I was very excited when it came out. A bit too excited, I want to say, perhaps. Probably because of how the community was buying it and stuff. Was like engaging with it. But it turns out that skills is the real way you put these models to work at scale because MCPs is really for a very limited audience of like developers, programmers, and not just developers, programmers, but people who want to expose their tools to everyone else, right? Like a service essentially, right? Like I want to sell my tools, here's an MCP. So they're still very valuable. And the new MCP app that Anthropic did is much needed. And I think they did it for the reason I'm going to mention, but they're not very intuitive at all, right? They're just code. They're actually the opposite of intuitive because they are built on like network communication and SSC and stuff that are like truly arcane if you're not like a proper software engineer. And a lot of full stack developers would not know that stuff, right? So like for me, I was fighting with like arcane stuff. Initially, I remember not even like Claude and the models themselves knew how to solve the things, the issues that I've been having. So like there was, yeah. But of course, when you get them to work, they were cool. Like they still have all the advantages of compressing. But I think skills are the real way because again, like people think of skills like prompts and they can be, but they're not. They're like environments of experience, right? They're like that little folder when you put everything the model needs to do this task. that's the environment. And it feels like an environment because Opus specifically has been trained to treat it like that. Like the minute it loads the skill, it has been trained to be like, forget what you know, here's our world now. That's the vibe I get. Right. So that was a huge thing. And why are skills so much better? They can be developed by anyone. They can be 90% natural language and they still work as good as a workflow, almost, right? Not always. To work as good as workflows, and why we can discuss at another time why they are different, you need much more scaffolding. So it can't just be like markdown files everywhere. You need your examples, your templates, your Python scripts that the model, like a lot of the times, a lot of the skills, they don't have code in there. They're just like, the model will figure it out. And every time it runs like similar code. Why? So you can imagine workflows by taking a skill and more adding more and more deterministic stuff that the model should run. So that's essentially what it is, right? So skills were a big one. And that's why the MCP apps came out today or yesterday or something. I don't know if you saw it, like interactive front ends for MCP servers. Exactly the reason is that, like, they're not intuitive at all. So how do we make them intuitive? Well, these models are amazing. They can on the fly create UX. So why not, right? And that's what they did. And that's something I also experimented a couple of months ago. Like I was doing procedural or generative UIs for workflows. It works. It kind of works, right? But it's still on that fun side in a way. And so that the skills were a big one. And then the other thing is like, I think like the harness was the other thing. And again, it's more like it's not obvious research, and maybe it's not the research that I would know a few years ago when we were during COVID and a bit after. If you asked me this, I would tell you about architectures and like here's the optimizer that's really good, and like here's the new approach to training and the new backbone for visual. None of that. Now it's all about like, yeah, how do we manage and orchestrate and interact? So the last bit is that hardness. It has been improved drastically. And it's really easy to see, very easy to see, by going from no hardness or minimal application to something like Cloud Code. You can immediately see that like, oh, okay, this is a different mode of operation, actually, completely different. And that also shows me like again what harness for engineering could do if we were to build it. And there is a lot of research there that I love, which is all that prime intellect, news research, and all these groups and many more researchers, right? That have around, oh, let's build these environments and these harnesses and solve things, right? And like, can we find environments that are generative or procedural? And every time I think about that or I talk to them, I realize that that's all we do. Like, for example, every time I would talk to some people like that, like they would say, yeah, if we can make a procedural task, it would be amazing. And then I'm thinking, okay, that's literally a lot of people's full-time job, procedural. So like, yeah, that's the other bit. I think the RL environment side, that's super interesting. There is a lot of like underlying deeper research in that area of like, yeah, how do you optimize, how do you do? But there is so much cool research at the surface. For example, there was this algorithm GRPO, whatever, like DeepSeek came out of it, right? The math behind some sort of the post training. And there's 100 variants of that algorithm. And I saw a paper the other day, it was really cool. I think it was like training free GRPO. And all they did is like they did kind of like what the RL environment would do, sort of like generate a batch of solutions, put them together, try to understand. I forget like exactly which one was right and why, and embed this into back the model prompt and then redo the. So kind of like an automated in 50 lines of code that hold the SPI automation, and it worked. And it's like just a simple paper, simple research. What if we could do that RL training in real time in a scaffolding, right? And it just works. And like for tasks that you can repeatedly do, like it's like 10% better or something. So like that's the other area I think. Yeah, not very fundamental research anymore for me at least. Anyways, I was always like an amateur in a way in that. Like I was very interested and at some point quite deep I would understand most of things, but it's not my expertise. So now much more on the side of like how can you make it work, right? And there's more stuff. There is all the Ralph Wiggum stuff and like how do you make models work for hours, like the metro eval, like all this stuff, like how can we make like long, long horizon tasks? I think those are amazing because like it's literally all that we do. So again, if we want like these models to work in our domain, we need to have them working for hours. And how do you do that? Well, again, you do it with the scaffolding and the training. So yeah, those are the areas I think I was interested in. very applied by now.
I could see the difference between like a few years ago in our
But
talk
yeah,
on much more
yeah.
research driven now it's applied. And I
It's
also
also
feel like
much more
construction.
expensive to do the fundamental, right? You can't really do anymore. Like you can, like there's some cool innovations that come out from smaller labs, but like you need like billions to do like anything at the fundamental level.
Yeah. Also felt like when you were saying long horizon, will construction project which spans across multiple years, it's like so big horizon tasks. That's
Yeah.
another interesting problem to think about. I wanted to have it just so that everyone listening or watching understands a workflow. Like here's what my understanding is, and you can like, and we can see it on an example, so you could correct me. Workflow is bunch of steps. Some steps are deterministic, some steps are non-deterministic. For non-deterministic steps, we could have like skill, which could subjectively execute that task on the fly. For deterministic, could be API call or like Excel script, Python script, we can run it. So if
Yep.
I were to, let's say, I'm a structural engineer, I'm designing a slab and a beam. The way one typically does is, okay, design, create the building in, let's say, STAD, get the load, export the load on each slab and beam, get it into Excel, and check whether it, based on the formulas I have, whether it's compliant for that code or not. So if I were to have this whole like workflow into like with this AI native approach, like Excel is a deterministic, but the inputs are dependent on other tools' output. So how would you choreograph or think about this?
Yeah. So I think that the biggest difference. Okay, so workflow versus a skill or anything else. I think one big difference is even before we use them, you don't generally discuss with a workflow at all. So a workflow is a button. You can absolutely interact with the skill. You can stop it, you can pause, you can say not this, let's do the other one. You really have to be able to interact with the skill because again, it's not deterministic at all. It's kind of like best practice, follow this. And to be honest on simple things like but when the complexity and the context increases, it's hard to be deterministic. So that's the first difference. The other difference, you're right, like the workflow is people think of it as a graph, like or as a arrows and boxes, kind of is. In reality, is a hypergraph, which means you can go back, you can have loops and iterations, and you probably should have loops and iterations at every workflow, right? And the whole point of a workflow is that because I know how to generally solve a task, my graph structure is more or less deterministic, right? But every node or almost every node can have autonomy. So like instead of like a skill which is like fully autonomous at all any time. So at any time the agent could do A first and B after C, whatever. It will try to follow your recipe because like still in the skill you say do A first, then you go to B, right? But it might say, oh, I have B, I go to C, right? Like in the workflow it won't. The other bit is like the other stuff are very similar. It's just rearranging how things use. Like in your skill, you should have a script for something you do every time. In your graph, that is a node and that node just run the script, right? Um, so like all the stuff. That's really the difference. And I think there are values and merits to either of these, right? I think there is the truth will be somewhere in the middle. I think eventually, and maybe eventually skills become the thing we do because the models get trained so well that the skill could be operating as a workflow. Maybe. But I don't know. Like in our tasks, the issue is that once you get skills that are kind of like in distribution and you say, oh, that works, let me make a skill for like this engineering task, you see there is much more difficulty because the models simply don't know. So what do? You add expertise and more expertise and more expertise. And here's how you do it. So in a skill, you might say the easiest thing to do in a skill is like attach the PDF of these standards. Follow this. Easy, right? Everyone can do it, done. But then you would be like, wait a minute, I use these standards every time. Why do I attach a PDF? Should I make a table of this? Like the 10 things that I need you to check. Like it's kind of that
Mm.
thing. Like you make it more deterministic, even though the agent could kind of do it on its own, right? So that's the biggest difference of a work or with a graph. And we've had a lot of success with workflows. The other huge advantage of workflows, it's a bit underestimated because we're not in a era of abundance, not really, but at least because like we are in a low, essentially we are still in a regime of like very high complexity, very high value, very low. QPS, very small queries across the AC, right? You won't have like a billion queries for design review, right? You will have 100. It's still okay to sort of like, oh, I can put the best model to do that. But the other advantage of workflows is that, and you can see it in practice, and I've seen it, and it's really amazing. You can get models many generation older do the task better than a skill if you spend some time on it. So like you can get a very small model that has nothing on Opus 4.5 and it can execute a complex task every time perfectly. So that's the other advantage. It won't be very big advantage for us initially, I think the AC, because again, we don't do a billion requests, like we don't do like, but eventually like if we want to scale, you need to have like all that delegation and like you can't have Opus doing everything, right? Like it's impossible. There's not enough Opus or there's not enough 5, or you could have 5.2 and then it takes 2 hours to do a simple calculation because it's like very slow. So that's the other bit. And the last bit that I like is like people just get the graphs, they get workflows. Like I think even though the skill is more intuitive to create, they could create it on their own. At this moment in time, it's easier to describe what a workflow is than a skill. So like how do you describe to someone, oh, a skill is just a folder. Like what? How does that work? Like but a workflow, what is it? Oh yeah, it's a step-by-step process, and at each step we just put there what you told us. Right. Like so I don't know. Does that make sense? But they're really there, like I said, two sides of the same autonomy coin. Like the main difference is the autonomy the agent has, right? In a skill, it pretty much has free reign. It's free. It's kind of like the old Rage Against the Machine song, right? It's free to do what we tell them. That's it. Like so, in the skill, the agents are free to do what we tell them, right? But they are still free. They can do like things on their own. In the workflow, not really. They are free to decide at points of decision, important points, but they have to follow the graph. And in some workflows, I've experimented with that and it works really well. They are free to like to create new parts in the graph, but not completely go outside of it. So you can imagine like node generation in a workflow, but it wouldn't be a whole graph generation. It would be like, hey, wait a minute, this happened. Maybe I need something more. If these conditions are met, yes, I can spin up something new. So yeah, does that make sense? And of course, every time it loops back is as if it's creating new nodes, right? So that's the difference, I think. Like I don't know, it's very subtle difference. At some point, it would be meaningless. I think. Like at some point, they will converge so much that would be meaningless. But to converge, we need to start from workflows. I think. I think like if you start from skills, it's very hard to work on the workflow mode. I've seen it. I've seen that firsthand. It's very hard. People just because again, like there is a beautiful talk by what's the guy from Monty Python? Like, there's a beautiful talk he has about innovation. What's his name? And is an amazing video. And like at some point he says, I wasn't the smartest. I wasn't like the smartest or funniest of the group of the Monty Python, right? Not at all. But people that were more talented in the group than me, they would just take the first solution and be done. They would take the first joke and they would finish. I would stay with it. I would fight with it, right? And that's why my material was better, right? And it's kind of like that. The workflow, you sort of stay with it. To build a workflow, you need to stay with it because you're trying to like make something work, and 90% of the time, every time or something, right? And it's hard. It's not easy. With a skill, you could be like, yeah, sure, I can attach this. Yeah, just drop this here. Let's put this file there. I just put it, like, so it's hard to go from that mindset to like, now I need to specify. But it's easy to go from a workflow to a skill. Both are possible. Like you can even have a model translate, but the workflow to a skill is like this, right? It's literally one simple prompt. I have all my workflows and skills. To a workflow is like what you even need the code to execute it. Where do you find that, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts there. Maybe at the end of the day, it won't matter, but right now there is a distinction. Going
I
back
just
to the
think,
last point of this, skills are like agents. They are much fancier. Like it's really again a magic trick, right? To be like, look at this, and it just works. And like all you see is like, oh, now I'm doing this. I'm searching there. I'm opening this. Like, wow, all on its own. I didn't need to do it. It's magical, right? A workflow is less magical because all you see is like step one finished, doing step two, step two. Like, and every time you run it, you just see the same thing. And it's kind of like not as magical, but I feel it's higher consistency in every task that is not in distribution.
God, I was wondering, like, maybe someday else, like, would be good to see how you, like, use Claude to create, like, workflow or a skill
Yeah.
because it will align, like, my imagination and how you are actually building is
Yeah.
but it's
The
a
easy
separate.
experiment for everyone if they want to do at home is like try to build a skill that builds a workflow. That's it. And I think you can learn a lot about both.
Oh,
Uh, I do have a skill like that. And you can imagine, like, even though you don't have a workflow authoring space or library, just think of like, yeah, how would the skill create a workflow? And what maybe it doesn't have the code to run it, but it creates the workflow, right? And if you do that, you can sort of like get intuition about both.
interesting. To conclude, anything which we didn't cover in this interview and like to share on a closing note?
Yeah, closing note, I think is the same as it's been the last couple of years. I think, and this time I'm trying to see the exact moment where my previous call was wrong or like stops being correct. I remember like years ago in the digital futures era, I was saying that, you know, architects, engineers, designers AI will democratize design and engineering. And then a couple of years later, I realized, oh no, it actually democratize product development and like all the stuff that we're doing around. And I think now, and in both cases, though, the message was the same of like, when I would talk to like experts in the field, I would say like, it's all really up to you. Like the biggest gap anyone has to cover when building any AI solution today is the domain expertise gap, is not the AI gap. So I think that's my last message. Like this remains true. And we see if we go back to like, and I think if we cover that gap, if actually domain experts believe this and take a shot and like, just go for it and create something, and even if it's a small percentage of them that keeps going, I think we will get a third era where we go back to AI is democratizing design engineering, because that's what was missing from the first time I said it. We were missing this sort of paradigm of like, where do I embed my expertise so that it's always so like, yeah, that's my last message. I think like the biggest gap is the domain expertise gap. So like, if you have domain expertise, use it with AI and you will create magic.
Amazing, Theodore. Like as usual, packed with insights and ideas. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you again. Thanks everyone.